So next I am pleased to introduce Miss Erin Breault. Erin is a social studies teacher at Pittsburgh Public Schools CAPA, which stands for Creative and Performing Arts, grades 6 to 12, and has been teaching AP World History for 2 years, AP Psychology for 8 years, and has taught AP European, as well as Civics and World History at CAPA, Brashear, and at now closed Peabody High School. Erin was born and raised in Ontario, Canada, holds bachelor's and master's degree in history from Queen's University at Kingston and the University of Toronto. After teaching in Toronto and Ajax, Ontario, Erin emigrated to the United States 25 years ago and has had the opportunity to work in Boston Public Schools, Wake County Public Schools in Raleigh, North Carolina, and finally Pittsburgh Public Schools. As an educator, her main goal is to encourage students to examine history through a critical lens of race, class, and gender. Today, she is going to be discussing her World Architecture project, which she uses in her AP World History course. So, welcome, Erin.
Oh, sorry. Sorry.
No, that's fine. In just 1 second.
There we go.
Erin, and we're going to welcome you and invite you to start.
All right. So if you would, you can show the first slide. It doesn't matter. Or we can wait. Okay, I'll just start and then we'll show it later. Okay. Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this discussion. And what I'm going to be talking to you today is a world architecture unit that I've been encouraging my students to do for about 8 years. These lessons guide students through an exploration of world history through the lens of architecture. The students are introduced, and this usually comes at the beginning of the course. So what I'm going to be telling you is basically what the unit does and what the learning outcomes for students are. So what happens is that students are introduced to world history themes, such as to what extent does European architecture borrow from and impact other cultures? And of course, this is the theme of globalization, which is very important for AP World History. So we also look at such historical thinking skills as we compare and consider periodization and continuity and change over time. Specifically with the World Architecture Project, students are apprenticed to a way of seeing. And I'm going to echo Dr. McCluskey here that students are taught to look at a building and to appreciate the role of place in their analysis of culture. So, and they really, really get excited when they are presented with images similar to what Dr. McCluskey showed us, especially the comparison of two different pieces. They're very interested in and are very excited and engaged as we discuss art as well as architecture. For world history, architecture is sometimes the only artifact left for historians to analyze a culture. Of course, you probably remember Western Civ classes. Monumental architecture is considered a hallmark of civilization. So we consider all that as we go along. So the essential questions that students are encouraged to answer are, what are the characteristics of a style? What materials and technology were available to that period of history or that region of the world? Who are some prominent architects? And what cultural values does the style exhibit? And how does the style reflect the historic period out of which it emerged? And these last two questions are really the focus of the unit. So you can change to the next slide, please. Thank you. So what happens in the course of the unit is that students need to have vocabulary to discuss architecture. So the first thing they do is they research in class such terms as arch, column, nave, and of course right here a vault, frieze, facade, as well as the major styles of architecture: Egyptian, classical, Romanesque, Gothic, Renaissance, all the way to postmodern. They also will look at what vernacular architecture is, and vernacular is the local or indigenous small scale architecture, because this is a world history course and students are considering architecture that emerges all over the world in different periods. You can turn the next slide, please. Thank you. After they've done their research, I organize a tour to the Carnegie Museum of Natural History, and we tour the Hall of Architecture. So what you're seeing on the slide is a group of my students, and the docent leads the students through the hall in a chronological order, and she points out certain developments, or he points out certain developments, such as form follows function, and also patterns of reaction and innovation are also highlighted. The case study that they are particularly interested in, because the casts that are available are so wonderful at the Hall of Architecture, is European medieval and Gothic styles. So the docent makes a particular point of discussing that. She or he will also take us to the Scaife Gallery and show the students some medieval and Renaissance pieces of art, and they are then apprenticed on what are the differences and why that would be, considering the different periods of history. Along the way, we are lucky at the Scaife, we can also see some Chinese and some African art pieces, and that serves to round out our tour of the museum. After that, the students actually have a scavenger hunt they need to do. They have about 15 questions where they need to walk around and find certain pieces and note the date and the style, etc. That's their little informal assessment that they have. You can turn to the next slide, please. So when we get back, students are responsible for researching a style that they choose. And I have about 30 students in each of my classes, so I had to come up with 30 styles. The project has expanded over the years as we get more and more students. And so this picture you see here is the result of all that research. The student has made a PowerPoint about Egyptian architecture, and she's sharing with her table mates. They're clearly enjoying the presentation, looking at all the smiles there. And what the students do in their presentation is they show images of the style's main buildings. They discuss the cultural values revealed by the structures, and they look at the historic period. They look at how political, economic, technological, and cultural and religious beliefs have actually influenced the architectural expression. The classmates that are seated around the student, they take notes, and they're encouraged to draw, because this is part of learning how to see a piece. So they're encouraged to draw the essential characteristics of the architecture. And then they can bring all these notes to the test, which they will have, which they have about a week later. So you can turn to the next slide. Thank you. So here's just an example of what they do for a summative assessment for this unit. They're presented with about 15 styles of architecture, and they just identify it. So this one clearly is Chinese. So you can turn to the next slide. As I said before, the main focus of the unit is to understand how architecture reflects the cultural values of the society the student is studying, and how it reflects the historic period. So this is, if for all the AP teachers out there, this is a classic continuity and change over time essay. I'm killing two birds with one stone. I'm also helping them write this particular kind of essay. But the question is, discuss the pattern of innovation and reaction revealed in our study of architectural style. They are required to cite specific styles, usually they cite their own, and the historical context and events that gave rise to the change in styles. And then I'll just give you a little example of that if you turn to the next slide. Thank you. So while they're considering this question, this goes right to the heart of what they've learned from this unit. So in terms of patterns of reaction and innovation over time, you see two images here. One is of a Baroque structure, another is of a neoclassical. So what the kind of things that they've discovered would include that neoclassical architecture is a, I'll just hold on for a second. Okay, sorry about that. So they would note that neoclassical was a reaction to Baroque and Rococo buildings. And I'm going to echo Dr. McCluskey here that these buildings reflect absolute monarchy and that was exhibited in the 18th century. Neoclassical 18th century period would have reacted to that kind of political structure. And the neoclassical building, in contrast, displays symmetry, linear characteristics, which harken back to classical Greece and Rome, which, of course, were prior examples of democracy and republican government that the Enlightenment featured. So this would be one example of how they would take and see and look at architecture and understand. I love this your term, the linkages to history. So could you turn to the next one, please? All right. Of course, I started off by saying that this unit really tries to emphasize globalization, one of the major themes of history. So one of the things they also noticed as they studied is the cultural borrowing that is evident. And so here's a very simple example. The Alamo in Texas exhibits Islamic or Spanish Moorish influences. And to be specific, it's the Islamic architectural arch, which is called an alfiz, and I'm sure I'm not saying that correctly. And then one that they'd be very familiar with, being from Pittsburgh, is the Sailors Museum, which has clear influence from Asia with the pagoda style. I just forgot to say that also inside the Alamo, I did not know this, I've never been there, but there's also been recently uncovered geometric patterns of flowers and pomegranates, which is very typical of Islamic art. And then the last slide. Okay. So one of the things we like to do is to display their work. So the World Architectural Project, here are some of the students' images that they found and some of their findings. And we had that up in the main atrium. Now this is hanging in my classroom. And that's all. Thank you.
Okay, so again, we'd like to open it up to questions for Ms. Breault. But again, I'd like to start off by just asking one.
Sure.
So you know that you're teaching an AP World History course. Could this easily be adapted to a traditional world history course?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I started this project many years ago when I was teaching a grade 10 world cultures course. And students really, really responded to it. That's actually one of the things when I see them again, they say that they remember doing is this project. And one thing that was very helpful for them, I think, is that they now look at buildings differently. So when they walk around Pittsburgh, which is a wealth of architectural styles, they will come back to class and say, "Oh, I saw, a building that looked like it had Renaissance or it had, neo-Gothic influences." So I think it's a very engaging and enriching experience for them. And I think other classes other than AP could do it. In fact, last year I didn't do it because I was a little bit nervous about the time constraints of AP. But this year I thought this would be very helpful for them to actually have a structure on which to think about history. Because otherwise it becomes a little overwhelming, I think, all the content that's required of an AP course. I hope that helps you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Other questions? I just want to make two observations. I absolutely love two things that you're doing, and one is having your students draw what they're looking at, even if they're not artists themselves or something, but it really helps, just to get them into the process of seeing and making discernments between one approach to building as opposed to another approach and things like that. I think that's great.
Indeed.
And the other thing I love is that you use local examples too, not just the Carnegie Museum and Soldiers and Sailors, but you could, like you say, you could teach a world architecture course in Pittsburgh. You really could. I mean, just, because the traces are everywhere.
I agree.
And I think that's not so uncommon in most, larger cities across the U.S. that they've got a little bit of everything going,
They do.
And just to open students' eyes to the fact that their city is a kind of world city in many ways, that they're surrounded by it. I think that's really great. I love it.
Thank you.
Sure.
We have one question through the chat feature. The question is about how long does this unit take? About how many weeks?
It doesn't take all that long, actually. So I'm on a block schedule, so I'm counting up in my head really quickly. So one block for the research, one for the museum tour, and one to do the presentation. So that's a week. If you're a block schedule, it would be, I guess, it would be the same for every day because we're at day 1, day 2. So a week it can take. Now you might want to give your students more time to actually do the research. So give them a little bit more time at home, but just about a week.
And Erin, I know that you kind of weave this then throughout your curriculum and kind of reference it again as you teach different historical periods. But if someone was concerned about not having enough time in the AP World History curriculum, you could teach this unit after the test as well.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that would actually be a really interesting way to do it. And I'll think about trying that because I think that would just sort of sew everything up for the students. Absolutely.
Like that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
And,